sharing with us this a Russian perspective on deterrence. We have a moment for questions, and I'm looking at Emily. We can probably go a few minutes. Okay, so don't refrain from asking questions and going into a debate, unless you're too hungry. But let us give you a chance to join the conversation. All is clear? I had one question, but I don't want to just one question to maybe the three of you in a way. What struck me in all three presentations is how the policies are moving. It's not as clear as it used to be in many ways. So I would have three very quick questions to each of you, which are sort of prompted by your presentation. One for Noam on based on what your analysis of the Obama administration policy, do you expect this policy to change dramatically after with a new president? Because it's interesting to see how much Obama changed it rhetorically, but reading your listening to you didn't had a lot of difficulty to altering it much further. On China, for Yoram, my question would be on the end state expected. I mean, do you, because there are lots of debates, and Alexei alluded to that, on where are the Chinese because of the opaque nature of the policy. And so in your research, do you see some sort of end state, or is it completely dependent on other factors, external factors such as missile defense and all of that for that, including the Chinese attempt or not to reach some sort of parity with the two bigger nuclear weapon states? And finally, on Russia, we see a lot of statements by Mr. Putin on the modernization of the Russian nuclear forces. And your graph also alluded to the fact that there would be a regrowing Russian arsenal in the next 20 years, which would go against the current trend. So, but those many declarations have not always been followed through because of budgetary constraints and all of that. So what would be your assessment for that? I wanted to give the floor to Patricia, and then I'll go back to the panel with the next, after a couple of questions. Patricia.
Thanks. Thanks to all the speakers. But I'm particularly interested to ask Alexei, why is it, do you think, Alexei, that it's so difficult to have a conversation in our field, in our communities about about nuclear deterrence, and to challenge the whole framework in which people think? It seems to be almost an article of faith that dare not be challenged. And why is that when so much else is challenged and discussed?
Thank you. Another? Yeah.
One or 2 points to Alexei. Actually, 2 comments. First of all, about weapons of deterrence as opposed to weapons of military use, and so on. The argument in favor of the notion, in which I believe, that nuclear weapons did contribute to stability during the Cold War between the two superpowers, is not about the nature or the planning of the weapons, but the overall effect of nuclear weapons, whatever their role was for military use or for deterrence. That's the first point. The second point has to do with your argument about the correlation between disarmament and non-proliferation. I have a very different interpretation of how proliferation went on, which includes in the recent publication of the INSS and invite you to have a look at it. But overall, I would disagree with you. It seems to me that regional states, as far as I understand their motivations and the dynamics of their decision-making, are driven not by general universal conceptions of disarmament of the big powers, but are driven by their immediate regional concerns about security and about the threats from regional rivals. So I would argue against the link between disarmament and proliferation. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have a last question over there.
Hello. I have a question for Alexei Arbatov about his presentation. My first question relates to the BDM debate, and which remains a major point, a major bone of contention between the United States and Russia. And the solution that you seem to come up with was to dissociate the ballistic defense missiles against, as a shield against Iran and the ROC states, or as a shield against the deterrence capacity of the enemy. My understanding of this is that the Russians do use this argument that the Americans are threatening them by placing interceptors in Poland and the Czech Republic for domestic purposes. So how do you, like for strengthening the Russian morale, like a Cold War struggle against the United States? So how sustainable, how credible is your solution? My second question relates to the interdependence between the Ukrainian crisis and the Middle East. And a few weeks ago, Ban Ki-moon made the point that the ROC states shouldn't use the Ukrainian crisis as a justification for the acquisition of a nuclear weapon. Do you think, or do you see a domino effect because Ukraine was deprived of its nuclear arsenal, and there are many, today many discussions about the fact that, you know, should Ukraine have the nuclear arsenal, then Russia wouldn't have invaded Crimea. This is my question.
So we'll go maybe in reverse order. So I give you each a few minutes to, because otherwise we can go into another second conference. But Alexei, you go first, maybe.
Let me also proceed in a reverse order about Ukraine. I think that the domino effect will not happen. And if Ukraine did not give away nuclear weapons in 1994, I think its relations with the West would be much worse. It would be considered as some kind of rogue state, and it would not be able to count now on very strong support of European Union, NATO, in its conflict with Russia. So certainly I regret very much this crisis. I think that Russia bears a lot of responsibility for this crisis. I think that the West also is not blameless for this crisis, but Budapest Memorandum importance is greatly exaggerated. At that time, the West, in the United States in particular, were applying enormous pressure on the Ukraine to get rid of nuclear weapons in fear of proliferation effect. That was the case. The violation of Ukrainian territorial integrity would have happened regardless if the situation was like this, and even more if the West was not supporting Ukraine like it is supporting Ukraine now. But about ballistic missile defense, I agree with you. I think that the rational assessment shows that American program poses no threat to Russian deterrent capability. The fact that it was so exaggerated is largely due to domestic factors and to domestic reasons. A lot of respected experts, former military and nuclear engineers and missile engineers and political scientists provide very persuasive argument that this will not be a threat, and Obama made several steps to alleviate those threats. They were not accepted because of domestic political considerations, and I think it was a great mistake and continues to be a great mistake. If those domestic considerations go away, we will be able to reach agreement with the United States to delineate defensive systems which may threaten strategic stability between our two countries, and defensive systems which may be handy to defend our territories against very small missile attacks, single missile attacks or small group nuclear attacks which can be launched by rogue states. Moreover, we can cooperate on such defenses. If those defenses do not affect our strategic relationship, we could cooperate to enhance the effect of such defenses of us and our allies against rogue states' missile threat. Now, about some very theoretical questions about deterring role of nuclear weapons. It's impossible to prove that or disprove it. If nuclear war happened during the Cold War, we would be able to say very definitely nuclear deterrence did not work. But since, fortunately, nuclear war did not happen, we will argue endlessly whether it was due to nuclear deterrence or not. One fact is that the only time when we really came very close to nuclear war was during Cuban Missile Crisis, when forces were on alert. There were a lot of incidents which could bring us to nuclear war. And you could say, look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. That is where mutual deterrence really worked. However, the trick is that Cuban Missile Crisis was provoked by nuclear deterrence because Russia wanted to put medium-range missiles in Cuba to match the United States in their missile build-up and to quickly achieve parity. So it was nuclear deterrence which produced the crisis and allegedly saved us from nuclear war. Nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. I'm not in disagreement with you, I think, because I said that nuclear disarmament in and of itself does not directly affect proliferation. If you have nuclear disarmament, you have to do a lot of other things to stop proliferation. Nuclear disarmament is not enough. But if you do not have nuclear disarmament, whatever you do, you will not be able to stop proliferation. It's very difficult, even at the polemical United Nations General Assembly or NPT review conferences, forums, to say to other states, do not acquire nuclear weapons, when our leaders, like for instance President Putin, says nuclear weapons is the main pillar of our security. How can we say to Israel, do away with your nuclear weapons, when we, enormous country, nobody threatens to delete us from the political map or from the pages of history, and enormous army, huge territory, big state, and we say, no, we are threatened, nuclear deterrence is our ultimate and main hope. So nuclear deterrence in this sense is counterproductive because emphasis on nuclear deterrence is a serious obstacle to non-proliferation. About Putin declarations, we have a very big strategic and tactical nuclear arms modernization program. If you take all the programs which are in the pipeline, ballistic missiles, tactical missiles, and so on, it is comparable to the times of Cold War, when we had many systems simultaneously. However, the procurement part is very different. Procurement is not comparable to Cold War times. We procure now something like 15 missiles per year. During the Cold War times, in some years, we produced 300 missiles per year. That is not the case now. So the budget certainly is a limitation, and in particular, the limitation is the requirement of modernizing Russian conventional forces. So if we spend too much on deterrence, we will undercut our security. However, I'm very much upset by this obsession of Russia with nuclear weapons. I think that Russia is presently the major nuclear-happy country in the world. It's even ahead of France now, with its admiration for nuclear weapons. And I think this is wrong. I think it should change. And finally, a very difficult question which was raised by Patricia. Why is it so difficult to put under question nuclear deterrence? And I would clarify it. When you are dealing with officials, probably, or with the military. Because among ourselves, we discuss it all the time. But when we are talking with the officials and with the military, well, because they have a very strong argument that during the last 70 years, nuclear weapons saved us from the Third World War. And there is no guarantee that it will that we will be saved from the war if we do away with nuclear weapons. They are not very sophisticated people usually, and it's very difficult to argue with them. But however, they make the decisions. That's the bad part of it.
Thank you, Alexei. Yoram.
All right. Well, having very limited access to data and information, we can rely, maybe not entirely, but at least partially, on China's strategic culture to get some understanding. And strategic culture, let's say from the time of Sun Tzu all the way to the time of Mao Zedong's People's War thinking and all that. And in this strategic culture, we can find some contradicting elements that may give us some clue about China's optional direction. There is a very strong sense of threat, always in China. China used to combine and still is still combining different means to create maybe a strategic stability or to address these threats. There is the dimension of depiction, always very strong. The vagueness is part of it. Also, the dimension of asymmetric warfare, and also a tendency to limit the power of the military establishment. So, taking all this together, I assume that just as China hasn't found good reason to attempt to get the level of American and Russian conventional forces, and it probably won't attempt to do it in the future. This is also the case with its strategic power. Attempting to build an arsenal of 1,000 or 2,000 advanced ballistic missiles and warheads is very expensive, and not only that, it requires China to give its armed forces, probably more than now, some control over the nuclear arsenal, something that China probably, or the Chinese political leadership, wouldn't like to do. That is part of the problem with the SLBMs, allowing nuclear submarines sailing in the seas and having only limited control over the nuclear arsenal. Maybe there are some technological ways to deal with it, but still. On the other hand, face is very important, especially as a rising power. It's important for China to appear as a modernized military power, and also to address strategic threats. So, taking all this together, I would bet, nothing more than a bet, that China will attempt to acquire self-reliance or even self-sufficiency capability when it comes to strategic arsenal. It will attempt to build an image of modern and efficient strategic power, and it will continue with the current policy of vagueness and all the things that Alexei, you have mentioned before. we won't get more details or more or clearer picture about China's arsenal. Yeah.
Thank you for trying. No.
Okay, the question was possible dramatic change in by new U.S. administration. So one of the last articles that I wrote as a member of the Arms Control Project at the INSS was on the U.S. nuclear employment policy from Bush Senior to Bush Junior, and I asked myself the same question, and the answer was, with regard to the 2008 election, we still didn't know whether it will be Obama and McCain, and the answer was no, we are not going to see any dramatic change, even if Obama will be elected. So if I would have written an article today regarding the next election, the answer will be the same. No, we shouldn't expect a new dramatic change in the actual policy. Maybe in the wording, maybe in the tones, but at the end it will be probably the same.
Thank you very much. So please join me in thanking our presenters. I go away with the notion that when you don't have nails and timber, you go for communism, and that maybe George W. should have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize if you look at numbers.